a paramedic for more than 20 years. I've seen firsthand some of the things we're going to talk about today. The problem that we have with strokes that we're trying to solve is that strokes are unrecognizable in most instances when they happen. It's important to remember that when we get to the training portion, I know some of you have medical training. This presentation is designed for people with no medical training. So I'm going to break it down to the most simple level so it's absorbable by everyone. And start by talking about the problem. Most of us don't recognize strokes, but after this presentation, we will be able to recognize strokes. The problem is so big and it's been going on for so long that we have rare bipartisan support. We have support from both our former and our current governor. So at the highest levels of our state, we have support in the form of funding, in the form of just goodwill and intentions for us to get this done, to make a change in our Virginia. The formal efforts started at the highest level of Virginia government with a proclamation almost a year ago, which is a largely ceremonial event, but it puts on paper, in a more formal sense, the state's intent to make a change regarding strokes, to make strokes more recognizable to people, make the education there so that people are able to recognize strokes and get treatment in time. We started with the formal proclamation from Virginia, and then that's spreading. So my job is to develop that same level of support from everyone in Planning District 8, all the elected officials in Planning District 8. And we see here a map of the jurisdictions in that planning district that have adopted the Stroke Smart program. In Prince William County, Chairwoman Ann Wheeler adopted the program at the beginning of August. And what that means is she signed the proclamation, but then she opened doors for us to go in and train everyone who works in Prince William County, all the government people who work in Prince William County. I've had the privilege of going in and training the library staff, for example. Chief Newsom mandated the training you're about to see to his 500 plus staff. I've gone into the Department of Health and Human Services in Prince William County. Many different facets of Prince William County are receiving the training. And then beyond the government work that we do, beyond working with governmental partners, we partner outside of the government, which is where the Prince William Chamber comes in. We'd like to get to every church, every mosque, every synagogue, every business in the county and make all of them stroke smart, so that ultimately everyone who lives, works, prays, and plays in Prince William County and in Virginia overall knows the signs of a stroke and knows to call 911 when they spot those signs. So I actually have a meeting scheduled next month with Fairfax. That's the last domino to fall in this big map, with Supervisor Rodney Lusk, in the hopes of bringing the program formally to Fairfax County. We're working on it. Since I am a paramedic in Loudoun County, this is my favorite Stroke Smart ceremony picture. We can see Chairwoman Phyllis Randall is there. She signed the proclamation in June. The Operation Medical Director, Dr. John Morgan, and we had strong support from Fire and EMS, as you can see there, along with Dr. Edward Puccio, who is the chairman of Loudoun's emergency department. So we had strong support, and again, it's a ceremonial event, but then it opens the doors to training not only all the government officials, but then the non-governmental partners as well. And then Purcellville is the most recent jurisdiction in Planning District 8 to sign the proclamation, opening doors to training there. I've been in touch with Erin Rayner. She is the chairwoman of their kind of Prince William Chamber equivalent in Purcellville to bring the training to businesses there. So now that all that's out of the way, I'm going to train you over the next 30 minutes to be stroke smart. The training has 3 main objectives, and I'll ask you to hold your questions to the end, and there'll be plenty of time for questions. 3 main objectives of this training. The first objective is that by the end of our time together today, you will know the stroke signs. You'll know what a stroke looks like. The second objective is by the end of today's training, you will know to immediately call 911 as soon as you suspect a stroke. Without hesitation, call 911. The third and final objective of this presentation is that by the end of our time together today, you will be inspired to teach this information forward. You'll understand why that's important. You'll understand how you can make a meaningful, impactful difference and truly save lives and reduce disability from stroke with this very simple information. So I'll begin by showing you 3 clear, obvious, dramatic emergencies. No reasonable person would come across that businessman on the floor in the office with the phone in his hand and think, maybe he should just sleep it off for a few hours. No reasonable person would have that thought. Likewise, the man over the plate of breakfast food, he's giving us that universal choking sign across all times and cultures. That's the universal choking sign. People do this when they're choking and we recognize something's wrong. There's an emergency happening. No reasonable person would look up from their breakfast dish and think, maybe he should call his doctor for an appointment tomorrow, or maybe later on today he can get squeezed in. No reasonable person would have that thought. Same thing with that school bus crash. In all three of these events, the emergencies are clear, dramatic, obvious. We know instinctively someone's suffering, someone may be hurt. We need to do something, whether it's directly intervene, call 911. We know these are emergencies. The problem with strokes are not always so clear. They're not always so dramatic. They're not always so obvious. And I'm going to prove that to you now by showing you your first of 3 strokes that we're going to see today during our time together. It's not clear. It's not dramatic. It's not obvious, but the woman in this video is suffering very real medical emergency that warrants 911 activation and immediate intervention. This is your first stroke for today.
The Tulsa Air and Space Museum is hosting a launch today at the event. The event features live. I'm sorry, something is going on with me this morning, and I apologize to everybody.
This is Julie Chen. She's young, she's in her 40s. She's beautiful, she's smiling with both sides of her face. Her skin color looks great. She's in no obvious distress. Julie Chen is suffering brain damage from a stroke. If you notice, Julie's able to speak clearly when she's not reading from the teleprompter. Her very specific event is when she's reading words from the teleprompter, she can't process them to come out of her mouth without the trouble that she's having. That's a stroke sign. That sudden onset speech problem is a stroke sign. A normal, well-meaning, well-educated coworker of Julie's would tell her, Julie, I don't know what's wrong. Something's wrong. Go home, take a nap, have a good dinner. Come back tomorrow, we'll start fresh then. That's the wrong thing to do in the setting of a stroke, and something none of you who are taking this class today will ever do after the training. So I'm going to toss some numbers at you. Strokes are the #1 cause of long-term disability, and they are common. Statistically, according to the CDC, 1 in 6 of us will suffer a stroke in our lifetime, 1 in 6. So there's about 18 of us on this call, 3 of us statistically will suffer a stroke. Those numbers double when we hit 65. And there's a common misconception that strokes only affect older people. That's not true. Strokes can be suffered by anyone of any age. Julie was in her 40s, but people even younger than that suffer strokes. It's not uncommon. It's more common to have people older suffer strokes, but strokes are so common that every 40 seconds, someone suffers a stroke in our country. Every 4 minutes, someone dies of a stroke. So they're common. And they're devastating when they happen. They can change your life in an instant, but there is hope. There is hope, and that's what we're here today to learn about. It's important that we're on the same page about what a stroke is. A stroke, at its most fundamental definition, is blood flow interruption to the brain. Our brains are super sugar hungry, oxygen hungry organs. They're constantly bathed in a supply of blood, as we see here. And if one of those blood vessels gets blocked, which is a common way a stroke occurs, think of a clog in your drain in your sink, for example. If there's a blood flow interruption from that clot, the brain tissue that was being nourished from that blood vessel immediately starts to die. Brain damage starts to occur immediately as soon as that blood flow interruption begins. This is an animation of what our blood vessels should look like. Nice and open, free-flowing blood cells flowing without any obstruction. You can actually feel this happening to you if you take 2 fingers and put them just on one side of your neck, not both, because that can make you pass out. Just 2 fingers on one side of your neck. That's your carotid artery. You can actually feel the blood flowing up into your brain through that artery right there. This is what it should be like. Nice, open, free from obstruction, blood flow flowing freely. With a stroke, one of the causes, a common cause of a stroke, is as we see here, where there's some obstruction forming and that blood flow starts to slow down and eventually stop. As soon as that blood flow stops, immediately brain tissue that was being nourished begins to die. We have brain damage occurring. We have a stroke. One of the other reasons a stroke can be kind of tricky for us to pick up on, besides them not always being clear and dramatic, has to do with the way our brains are formed. Different parts of our brain control different body functions. So, for example, the back of our brain tends to control our vision centers. If the blood flow interruption happens in the back of our brain, the patient may experience sudden onset vision problems. So anything from sudden onset blindness in one or both eyes, sudden onset blurry vision. Now, my vision has been getting worse. It's sad but true for the past 5 years. That's not a stroke. It's the sudden onset. All of a sudden, everything's blurry. Sudden onset blindness in one or both eyes, double vision. And you can see why someone experiencing this kind of stroke might make the mistake of making an appointment with their optometrist, for example, but not after today. Sudden onset vision problems suggest a stroke. One patient told me that his only stroke sign was everything in his field of vision turned a rust color. That was his stroke sign, sudden onset vision changes. Another woman had the experience of her stroke was that she could see out of both eyes. She was driving down a town in Virginia that she'd never been to before. And she commented to her husband how very strange everyone in this town, this part of Virginia was, because they only put up all the signs, the traffic signs, they only put up half of every traffic sign. And she thought that was odd. What she didn't realize was she's seeing out of both eyes, but she could only see half of everything. It took her a few minutes to figure that out. She thought everyone else was a little on the weird side. She didn't realize she was having a stroke. Sudden onset vision problems suggest a stroke. If the blood flow interruption happens at the base of the brain, that cerebellum, as it did on January 26th of 2022 to New Mexico's Senator Ray Lujan, the patient might experience sudden onset balance dizziness problems. So our senator in New Mexico, January of this year, all of a sudden couldn't walk across the room without falling over. He just suddenly experienced terrible balance and dizziness problems. He did what very many well-meaning, well-educated people would do in that situation. If you're suddenly dizzy, he laid down and took a nap. That's the wrong thing to do and something you won't do after this class. If the blood flow interruption happens in the part of the brain that helps us produce speech, we might all of a sudden start speaking gibberish. We might not even realize it. If the blood flow interruption happens in the part of our brain that helps us process speech, it might sound to us like everyone is speaking gibberish. And how frightening would that be if you're in a meeting or at a restaurant and suddenly you hear everyone speaking gibberish? So different stroke signs happen to the patient depending on where the blood flow interruption is occurring in the brain. About 60 to 70% of patients will experience one-sided facial drooping or body weakness. So in this slide shows us the image of 3 patients who've been asked to smile. And you can see that only one side of their face is able to rise up. Only one corner of their mouth is able to rise, and then only one eye kind of crinkles up in response to that rising side of their mouth. Many stroke patients will experience this stroke sign, but not all stroke patients will experience this sign. So if we think back to the first stroke video we saw today, Julie Chen was able to smile beautifully using both sides of her face. So it's important to remember that a majority of stroke patients will present with one-sided facial drooping or body weakness, not all. And we can never say, oh, my friend who's suddenly speaking gibberish is able to smile with both sides of their face, so they're not having a stroke. That's not true. Stroke signs can be varied. Many patients will have this sign of one-sided facial drooping or body weakness, but not all. What we see here is an image of a field test that I use, that many medics use in the field. If I suspect a stroke patient, I'll have my patient sit down and I will take both of their hands in mine and I'll hold their hands out in front of them. I'll ask them to close their eyes and I'll say, I want you to close your eyes and I'm going to let go of your hands. And when I let go of your hands, I want you to keep them up, as we see in image A. And oftentimes the patient's one arm or sometimes both arms will slowly drift down or they'll fall down quickly, as we see in image B. And this is a common stroke sign, that one-sided facial drooping. And oftentimes I'll encourage them, keep your arms up, and they'll say to me, I am, and one arm is down. So not all stroke patients even realize that they have this body weakness. I had a call several years ago, a woman called for her husband. It was in the middle of the night. It's always in the middle of the night. She called 911. And by the time we get there, this man, he's slumped over to the side. It's clear he can't use one side of his body. And he's cussing and screaming at his wife, and he's cussing and screaming and spitting. He's so mad at me and my crew for being there. Why did you guys come here? I don't need you. I told her I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. And there was no amount of reasoning or convincing this man that he was unable to use one side of his body. He couldn't even process that, because remember, it's brain damage that's happening to stroke patients. So it's not his fault. He didn't even realize this was happening. Now, sometimes patients will realize it, but not always. So it's important just to keep that in mind. So 60 or 70% of stroke patients will have this one-sided facial drooping or body weakness, but we want to get you in the 90s. So when we look at this slide, we see that about 90 to 95% of stroke patients will experience at least one of these signs on this very busy slide that will get a little bit easier. You only need one stroke sign, and the signs are sudden and unexplained. So we talked about the loss of balance and dizziness. It's not that someone maybe just got off a roller coaster and they're dizzy. That's explained. You know why you're dizzy. Or some people have a history of standing up from sitting and they're all of a sudden dizzy. If you have a history of this, it's not the sudden onset unexplained signs. The sudden onset vision changes, that facial drooping, body weakness on one or both sides. We've probably all had the experience of taking a nap and you sleep on your arm, you wake up and your arm's all tingly and funny because you were sleeping on it wrong, right? That's not a stroke, because as the seconds tick by, it's getting better and you know why that happened. You just woke up from a nap where you were sleeping on your arm funny. So the stroke signs are sudden and unexplained. And then the last one, difficulty understanding or forming words. And they can also start and stop. That's another kind of tricky part with strokes. So this slide shows us what 90 to 95%, depending on the study, of stroke patients will experience at least one of these stroke signs. And a way to help us remember all of that busy slide, is with the acronym BFAST. So the B represents the balance and dizziness issues that are part of the stroke signs. The E is for the eyes, that sudden onset vision changes. Double vision, blindness in one or both eyes, blurriness, those color changes, any kind of sudden onset vision changes. Don't see your optometrist, think stroke. The F is for the facial drooping. The A is for that sudden onset, unexplained arm weakness in one, or it can even be in both sides. The S is for speech, sudden onset speech problems, understanding or processing speech. The T in the BFAST acronym is for time. If you have any one, and you only need one of the BFAST stroke signs, sudden, unexplained, even if it starts and stops, it's T for time, time to call 911. All right, we're going to see your second of 3 strokes now, and this is of a woman called Stacy. Stacy did not take my class. She did not know the BFAST stroke signs, and she started suffering some of the BFAST stroke signs. Stacy made the mistake of driving herself to her doctor's office. That's a big mistake, and we'll talk about why as we go on. By the time she gets to her doctor's office, the stroke sign stops. Of course, that's how it is. The stroke sign stops. She explains the signs. She explains what was happening to her to the doctor, and the doctor says, Stacy, I think you're just really stressed out. You need to breathe deeply. You need to manage your stress. So Stacy goes back to her car. In the parking lot of her doctor's office, the stroke signs come back. Of course, that's how it works. So she whips out her phone. She films herself having a stroke, having still no idea what's going on with her. She didn't take this class. And she takes the video to another provider whose stroke is recognized. Her stroke came and went over 3 days. She had these symptoms coming and going. You're going to see Stacy's stroke now. Here we go.
My name is Stacy Jappis, and I suffered 3 strokes from March 31st for 3 days in a row up till April 2nd.
It's all tingly on the left side, on the left side. The doctor said to breathe in, breathe out, manage the stress, and I'm trying. I don't know why this is happening to me. It happened this morning again. So now I'm taking a picture for an example of what happens. My tongue feels very numb. I just tried to take a drink of something, and I couldn't drink it very well.
So with Stacy, we heard the slurred speech. We saw some left-sided facial drooping, but it's important to remember the entire group of BFAST stroke signs. If you've seen one stroke, you've really just seen one stroke. Strokes can be very different, even vision changes. Remember, one person's stroke sign was suddenly everything turned to rust color. So even vision changes can vary depending on where the blood flow interruption is occurring. Every stroke can be different. We only need one stroke sign, even if it comes and goes. It's enough to suggest a stroke. So it's important to remember that every stroke can be different. You're going to see your third and final stroke sign. This is of a stroke, live stroke that happened. This is of Congressman Dr. Ron Paul. It happened to him during a live TV interview. This video is short, but it does loop through twice. So you're going to have the opportunity to see Dr. Ron Paul's stroke twice. Here we go.
Liquidated. We have to get rid of that. That's a burden. We can we can't buy it. Liquidated. We have to get rid of that. That's a burden. We can we can't buy it.
So I think you can probably see the left side of his face quite markedly droop down. That's a significant change, and it happens just in a few seconds. You can see his face droops down. And then he did experience that speech changes. He wasn't able to speak. With Stacy, we could hear slurred speech. With Julie, she was able to speak clearly. With the congressman, he just degraded completely into gibberish. And we don't know if any of them were having any other of the BFAST stroke signs, but we can definitely see a couple of them here. So I hope now we've accomplished the first objective of today's training, which is for you to know the stroke signs, those BFAST stroke signs. And we're going to start now the second objective of today's training, which is for you to be confident in the immediate need to call 911 as soon as a stroke is suspected. And really the reason to do that is because in a very real sense, during a stroke, time is brain. Remember, as soon as the blood flow interruption occurs, brain tissue, brain cells start to die. During a stroke, we lose 2 million brain cells every single minute. Now we have a lot of brain cells. We have billions, but 2 million is not a small number. So every minute that a stroke is occurring without treatment, brain death, brain tissue is happening. So when we look at the studies, when we see the results for people who have strokes, overwhelmingly, the people who walk away from strokes with the fewest deficits, sometimes with no deficits at all, are the ones who get to treatment right away. Not make an appointment with their optometrist, not make an appointment for a doctor the next day, but call 911, get to the emergency room right away. It's important to emphasize again that I work for the nonprofit Northern Virginia EMS Council, and I am a paramedic. I am not funded by any pharmaceutical companies, and that's important to remind you of now, because I want to talk to you about a medication. In 1996, the FDA approved a medication, a first-line medication to treat strokes. It's a powerful, powerful medication that after only about 4 hours, the risks begin to outweigh the rewards. So for stroke patients to even be eligible for consideration for this medication, they have to get to the emergency room within 4 hours after the stroke signs begin. So you can see that if a patient takes a nap or even calls their doctor for an appointment later that day, they so easily put themselves out of that first line treatment consideration. It's not even an option for them. And when we look at the studies, depending on the study that we see, the vast majority, I've seen as high as 80%, 80% of patients arrive at the emergency room too late to even be eligible for that medication, largely because they didn't know that they were suffering a stroke. Like our senator from New Mexico, they were just dizzy, lay down and take a nap, or sudden onset vision changes, make an appointment for your optometrist. Because they didn't know, they put themselves out of even consideration for the first line medication. How we want you to get to the emergency room is by calling 911. Too many times, stroke patients make the mistake, like Stacy did, of driving themselves to the facility. Many times in my 20 years as a paramedic, I've been called to the scene of a car crash where the driver is unconscious and unresponsive. I don't always know why they're unconscious and unresponsive other than the trauma from the car crash. Maybe they were suffering a stroke and then crashed into a telephone pole. I can't even assess them for a stroke at this point. And now I'm dealing with whatever trauma has been created. So it's very dangerous in a very real sense for a stroke patient to ever drive themselves to the emergency room or anywhere. One of the last things we want you to do is drive yourself to the emergency room if a stroke is suspected. It's dangerous not only for the patient, but for everyone else on the sidewalks and on the road. Another mistake stroke patients make, and well-meaning family members, coworkers, loved ones make, is having a friend or family member drive the stroke patient to the emergency room. One of the reasons this is such a bad idea is because not all emergency rooms can treat strokes. The medication is powerful. The doctors and nurses who are administering it have to go through special training. Not every emergency room has the staff to treat strokes with this medication. So what will happen is if you drive your friend, your loved one, your coworker to an emergency room that doesn't treat strokes, it's not a stroke center, that facility will transfer you to the proper facility, but there goes your time window. Remember, time is brain, and every minute literally counts when it comes to brain health in the setting of a stroke. The last few reasons we want you to call 911 still have to do with time. When I'm with a stroke patient, sometimes in their home, maybe in the driveway before we've even left their home, I'm on the radio with the emergency room telling the staff that I'm bringing in a stroke patient. As soon as the emergency room staff hears that EMS is bringing in a stroke patient, that emergency room staff activates the hospital's internal stroke team. What that means is the emergency room staff is pulling doctors and nurses from all over the hospital who are trained to treat strokes. So those healthcare providers are waiting for the stroke patient at the door when I hit the door of the emergency room to treat that stroke patient. They're clearing out that CT scanner machine. That CT scanner machine is ready for the stroke patient. That doesn't happen when you drive yourself or have a friend waiting for you. You don't get that extra 10 or 15 minutes of lead time. The last reason, and it's only happened maybe a half a dozen times in my whole career, that dispatch will come over the radio and they'll tell us that the CT scanner at hospital X is down because it's down for maintenance, it's broken. I was talking to a stroke coordinator in Richmond a few months ago, and she was telling me that her both of the hospital CT scanners were down. So what that tells me as a paramedic on the street is, if I have a stroke patient in the next few hours until dispatch tells me the machine is back up, to take that patient to the next closest appropriate facility. So even if your sister's cousin's husband's nephew was treated down the street at hospital X last week, so you know that's the right hospital to take them for strokes, you don't know that the machine is up and running today. It's still the best bet to call 911. That's still the best option. That's still the message of this training, is to call 911 in the setting of a stroke. Oftentimes when I give this call, with this talk, people will bring up the very real concern of finances. And hospitals cost money, EMS costs money. I don't know what the jurisdictional rate is for an ambulance ride, but I do believe it's less than $1,000. The point of this slide is it's indicative of many studies that the lifetime cost of a stroke is so much higher than even the cost of an ambulance ride. And many times hospitals, emergency jurisdictions will work with patients to negotiate the cost of an ambulance ride. It's a lot easier to negotiate down the cost of an ambulance ride that's under $1,000 than it is for $140,000. It's orders of magnitude higher treating a stroke that maybe you could have walked away from if you had recognized the signs and taking definitive action at the onset rather than waited. So that's why this slide is here, just to address the very real cost and very real concern of money, that it's so much more expensive to miss a stroke. And we're not over triaging strokes at all. That's not the issue. So that's the second objective, is to convince you of the immediate need to call 911 as soon as a stroke is spotted. And then rounding the corner into home is to convince you and inspire you to teach this information forward. Many of us have taken CPR classes. No one in the entire history of our planet has ever performed chest compressions on themselves in cardiac arrest. When they're dead from a heart attack, you cannot perform chest compressions. And so what I'm saying is, we take CPR largely for other people. And in a very real sense, those of us who are taking this training today are going to be able to use this knowledge to help others. What this pie chart shows us, it's from one study that's indicative of many studies, is only about a third of stroke patients arrive at the emergency room via 911. And only about 4% of that third are the ones who called 911 for themselves. So what that tells us is if you who are listening to the training today experience a stroke, it's very unlikely that you will call 911 for yourself. It's really other people who end up calling 911 for the stroke patients. So in order for you to have the safest environment from a stroke, you need to take this information and give it to someone else. Give it to people close to you, your coworkers, your family members, your friends, people you associate with. The Virginia Department of Health is so intent on getting this information out that they've made tangible memory aids available for free. These are images for free magnets and wallet cards that are available from the Virginia Department of Health in quantity. You can order hundreds of them at one time. Even shipping is free. We know that knowledge has a shelf life. I'm confident that my teaching skills are so amazing that everyone who takes this class would get 100% on any stroke quiz I give you after today's training. But 6 months from now, I'm not so confident because we tend to forget things over time. If you have one of these memory aids, if you have a stroke magnet and wallet card and you see it on a regular basis, 6 months from now or 6 years from now, when you encounter someone having a stroke, the hope is that you might remember it more. You might remember what the stroke signs are. You'll be more likely to call 911. Remember, the medication's been available for nearly 30 years, and we still see the vast majority of patients don't call 911 and don't get to treatment in time. We're hoping that with this training, with inspiring you to teach it to someone else, and by giving you these free magnets and wallet cards, you will remember the information longer and take it to other people. We're asking you also to be stroke champions. Many of you are business owners. You have larger spheres of influence than I have access to. Take these magnets and wallet cards, make them available to other people. Be a stroke champion. Teach this information forward. Many businesses, for example, in Alexandria, where the pilot program started, adopted this program, and they made the materials available in their places of business, just as you've seen here. And at the end of this, I'll finish with 2 more slides. One is this email that I share with permission. I gave this training to Prince William County Library staff, and you can see that it had a very real effect. All right. And then the last thing I have is a video that kicked off our efforts in Planning District 8, showing you bipartisan support. It's about a 2.5-minute long video that details our methods and motivation. And then, so after this video, I'll stop it and open up to questions. It's just about 2.5 minutes long.
Hi, I'm Governor Glenn Youngkin, and I am proud to call Virginia a stroke smart Commonwealth. I support being a stroke smart Commonwealth, and I ask you to be part of this life-saving critical mission for Virginia. Spot a stroke, stop a stroke, save a life. We're all in this together.
I'm Governor Ralph Northam. As a physician and neurologist, I know that early detection and intervention are key when it comes to saving a life from a stroke.
With a stroke, minutes and even seconds matter. One of our most consequential acts during my mayoral term was ensuring that we became the first stroke smart city in our country. If other municipalities join us in this public health commitment, imagine the lives we could save together. Every 40 seconds, someone in our country has a stroke, and every 4 minutes, someone in our country dies from a stroke. Time is literally of the essence. In Alexandria, we did something about it.
Stroke is the #1 cause of permanent disability and a leading cause of death. Up to 80% of strokes may be preventable. That's why education and preventative intervention is important. I can treat you in minutes, but I can't help you unless you get to me right away.
I can get you there in minutes, but I can't help unless someone dials 911.
The vast majority of stroke patients don't arrive in time for potential treatment, resulting in unnecessary death and disability. The sooner we can see a stroke patient, the better their chances are for treatment and recovery.
But none of this works if 911 is not called in time. It all comes back to the public knowing how to spot a stroke. The decision to become a stroke smart community begins at the top and requires the support of the entire community. This is so achievable. We began by approving a proclamation to become a stroke smart city.
Students in Alexandria learn about spotting strokes, and then they teach their families how to spot a stroke. This is a huge impact because we have almost 16,000 students multiplied by all of their family members. Becoming a stroke smart city and a stroke smart school system is one of the best things we can do as a community.
Our pharmacy is stroke smart.
We are a stroke smart church.
I learned about spotting a stroke, and then one day I wasn't feeling well and feared I was having a stroke. I called 911 right away. Because I was able to do that, I'm here today. I feel blessed I can enjoy my life with my husband of 50 years and my large family.
A 13-year-old boy is being honored for actions that helped save his mother's life twice. 2 separate times, Camille Allen had a stroke. Her son Xavier noticed the signs. He took action and he called 911.
I'm very proud of him because if it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't be here today.
Spot a stroke, stop a stroke, save a life.
This is public health. This is Stroke Smart Virginia.
All of us can become stroke smart and save ourselves and our loved ones.
All right, so that is Stroke Smart, and you are now all part of it. You're all part of the solution. You all have the power to change lives, to save lives and reduce disability from stroke, and to teach this forward.